I'm Ellen Gunning. Thank you for joining me this afternoon, and welcome to the very first of the virtual conferences that EADL, the European Association of Distance Learning, is organising over this year, 2020. Let me begin by telling you that the title of this conference is Distance Learning, Adapting to New Challenges. And one of the people who had to adapt to a new challenge was our president, John Trasler. He had intended to be with us today, but his broadband is a little bit dodgy in Scotland, so instead he pre-recorded this message. And we'll see if Chris can actually get that video piece to play. Thanks, Chris.
Hi, I'm John Trasler. I'm the president of EADL, and I'd like to welcome you to this webinar today, which we set up to give you some experiences of our members in coping and dealing with the COVID-19 virus. When the virus took hold earlier in the spring, we suddenly realised as members of organisations that specialise in imparting knowledge and information at a distance that we had some skills and knowledge that could be useful to a number of people. So we made a number of our resources available on our website, and I hope that you'll want to go and have a look at those, and in due course perhaps hopefully want to become members of the association as well. Today we have three great speakers, two of whom are members of the EADL, who are going to lead you through some examples of what's happened, and that'll be moderated by one of our executive directors, Ellen Gunning, who's the director of the PR Training Academy in Dublin, and she's a great moderator and a great speaker, and I'm sure you're going to have a fantastic session. So I hope you enjoy it, and we look forward to you being in touch with the EADL soon. Thank you.
Super, lovely message there from John Trasler, the president of EADL. As he said, I'm Ellen Gunning, and it's my pleasure to moderate this conference this afternoon. Let me begin by doing the housekeeping pieces if I can, and then we can get into the fun stuff. The Q&A button is there. We would like you to use it. We received a number of questions in advance. We would like to receive more questions as we go through, please. So as people tickle your fancy, put an idea into your head. If it's a broader topic that you think, I wonder what that means actually for the industry going forward in the new year, pop it into the Q&A and we'll get to it at some stage today. The session is also being recorded, just to let you know, and we will send you a link to the recession, hopefully tomorrow, certainly within the next 48 hours, and we'll follow up with you by email. And finally, this is also being streamed live on Facebook. So hello the world. Nice to have you all with us. Our timelines for today, to let you know how the conference is running. Each of the speakers will speak for approximately 12 to 15 minutes. They've each prepared a presentation on their topic. We'll allow about 10 minutes afterwards for individual questions to each speaker. So we've three speakers in a row. George is our first speaker. We'll take his presentation for 10-15 minutes, a 10-minute Q&A afterwards, and the first of two polls. We have two short polls that we're doing with you today. So the first poll after that, I haven't allowed any time for the poll. It's like nanoseconds. Be very fast and we'll just move on. Henrik, our second speaker, will speak for about 12 to 15 minutes again, and again a 10-minute Q&A after that, and then straight into Gilly Salmon, who's our third and final speaker, for a 10-15-minute presentation and a Q&A with her. We have a second mini super fast poll after that, and then we'll open it to the floor and take a panel discussion on whatever topics actually tickle your fancy. I mentioned earlier that we are oversubscribed today, which is super. We've had over 100 people subscribe, and if you're a data geek like me, you'll be really interested in what countries people are coming in from. We got a slight flavour of it earlier, but let me give you the full list. We're joined today by people from the UK, Ireland, Denmark, Cyprus, Switzerland, Germany, France, Australia, South Africa, Italy, Portugal. How groovy is this? Turkey, Eswatini. Does anybody know where Eswatini? That one really threw me. Eswatini is the former Swaziland. Nigeria, Netherlands, Norway, Singapore, Uzbekistan, and Mexico. So welcome to each and every one of you. As I mentioned earlier, I'm Ellen Gunning. I've been a member of EADL for about the last 10 years or so, and I serve on the Executive Council, which I thoroughly enjoy, I must admit. My membership of the organisation really gives me the benefit of sharing insights and gaining insights from others who work in the online and distance learning space. And it's, from a practitioner's point of view, it's a very, very valuable organization to be a member of. My business, as John mentioned, is the PR Training Academy, and we're an online membership platform who provide bite-sized online courses to people who are interested in promoting their businesses. So we focus on communications issues like how to shoot smartphone video footage, how to write a really good press release, how to organize a feature article, how to negotiate sponsorship. And we provide 24 new courses guaranteed every year, so 6 new courses every quarter. I might ask Chris to just pop up the links into the chat box if you would. Our website is www.prtrainingonline.com, and my direct contact is ellen@prtrainingonline.com. My business teaches you the skills to promote your business effectively. We're here to listen to the experiences of 3 different people. In March of this year, the world changed forever. When the pandemic struck, everything pivoted and nothing will ever be the same again. Most of us no longer travel to the office every day. Instead of attending conferences and seminars, we Zoom. We conduct staff meetings by Microsoft Teams. We start emails with expressions like, "I hope you are safe and well in these strange times." How extraordinary is that? We no longer walk into a pub for lunch. We have to book, for heaven's sake. We can't go into nightclubs. We wear masks when we're indoors. We keep distances between family and friends, and we constantly monitor social media to find out what's happening with the virus. Into all of this mix, we had education and training, and that world was similarly turned upside down. We want to focus on the training element of that today. Training is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and it literally screeched to a halt at the edge of a precipice in March of this year. Our members are going to share with you their insights into how they coped with it and what they think is happening in the future. George de Jong is Managing Director of Dirksen in the Netherlands, and he'll share his experience of running a multi-million euro business based on physical training and how in the space of a few weeks, they have begun a transformation to become mostly an online business and the huge marketing challenges that that brought with it. Henrik Helm from the University College in Copenhagen will give you very practical hints and tips on how to create presence and interactivity online. Both of those gentlemen are members of EADL. Our third and final speaker, Professor Gilly Salmon from Education Alchemists in the UK, is not a member of EADL, but we're a very broad church and we know that she has great insights to share. And she has the unenviable task of looking at old and new challenges to online learning. A bit of a look back and a bit of a crystal ball gaze into the future. We've a big, interesting agenda to cover. Let's kick straight into it. Our first presenter is George de Jong. George specializes in structuring and restructuring processes, in reorganizing, building, motivating, negotiating, and team building. He needed every single one of those skills earlier this year as he guided Dirksen to what has become their new normal. I'm looking forward to hearing the story. George, it's over to you.
Thank you, Ellen. I'm starting to share my screen, and now I press a button over here. And if everything works fine, now everybody should be able to see how we adapted to COVID-19. Is that correct?
Yes, we can see it clearly. Thank you. You're on your first slide.
Hello, everybody. I'm George. I'm delighted to be given the opportunity to give a short briefing on how we at Dirksen Training and Education countered or dealt with COVID-19. And we're still dealing with it because everything has not changed back to the old normal. I will firstly introduce myself and the organization. I'm 57 years of age and started my career as an officer in the Dutch Army. And after 20 years in the field, I started working on various businesses. I'm happily married, 3 kids and a grandson, and started working at Dirksen in 2014. Very unfortunately, and that seems a bit strange, I became the director at Dirksen in 2019 due to the fact that the owner fell sick. What's Dirksen? Dirksen was established in 1966, as you can read, and it provides training in a rather specific niche market. To speak with the ideas of the owner, he always told us if it holds a data cable and an electricity plug, we'll provide training for it. And we do that mostly in the Netherlands, but as you can read, all over the world as well. Dirks is not a huge organization. We have 35 people working permanently for us and about 40 self-employed teachers in addition. And we make a nice turnover of approximately 4 million per year, if it's a normal year. And that's what we're talking about now. 2020 started very nicely. 2019 was a great year. 2020 was even better. But then in the beginning of March, the whole world changed. And then the question came up, what to do? Now, to be very honest, like everybody, we panicked. That's a very normal reaction to the situation. And fortunately for me, I got some training and we started to make plans again. We regrouped and we found ourselves a nice soft rock to sit on, think over. We took a time out. And the first action after that was send everybody home to prevent contamination and things getting worse. If you send everybody home, you got a communication problem. So we had to find ways to communicate with everybody at the same time. We had Adobe, but that didn't work very smoothly if you need to talk to 30 people at the same time. So we had to look for alternatives. And then some of our colleagues came up with the idea to use Teams. At that moment, as a brand new item, but it was in our 365 Windows package, and it turned out to work very smoothly. And then we're talking about 4 days after the start of the lockdown. The lockdown came not in one day at Dirks. It took about 4 to 5 days, and then everybody went off. And I'm talking about students. The client said, well, too dangerous, everybody home. So within 4 days, we had new ideas, but then again, we had a problem because there was no one there. So we were thinking about options and looking for options to work in virtual classrooms, because that was one of the options we had. We were in the old days a distance learning organization, but during the last 20 years, it was more or less only physical classroom training and a very little bit distance learning. So we were used to using e-learnings, but on a very small scale. So we had to rebuild our practical trainings using e-learning as well, or add e-learnings to the practical trainings. And in addition to that, we had to reset a lot of marketing tools. And on top of all these things, we had to prepare for working under COVID conditions, if that was allowed again, because we're still talking about the very end of March, I have to say, and then we had no classroom attending at all. One of the things we thought over was bring back the amount of pupils or students in a classroom to about 75%, and that seems still a lot, but we're talking about classrooms of about 8 to 10 people maximum, so we went back to 7 or 6 maximum. And in addition to that, we found ourselves a lot of gels, ventilators, masks, gloves, and everything to be able to give lessons in COVID conditions. All in all this resulting in the following, we choose ourselves, we found ourselves a lot of platforms, but in the end we choose for Vedamo. That was a platform that worked out nicely for us. and we were able to train our trainers in a very short period. And within 2 weeks, we gave the first virtual classroom sessions. We included a lot of digital variations in our courses. We made a blended learnings, and we reconnected ourselves with our customers and our students to inform them on the options, the changes we had installed, and that was a problem in itself. The main challenge at that moment turned out to be for us that nobody was really interested in learning in the beginning of the lockdown. And then as we managed to get in contact with our clients again and give them the feeling that they were safe to join our classroom trainings, we fortunately were allowed, due to the rules of the government, to restart on a very low scale the classroom trainings around May 11th. All in all, this had a lot of implication on marketing, on our marketing. As I already told you, it was a problem to get in contact with our clients. They also were all gone home and not easy to get in contact with. And a whole lot of students in the telecom business, for example, they were and are in essential professions. And it was very hard to get them back to study again. Another problem we had was that we had a brand new website. It was launched on March 7th. And we had to adapt everything that was just brand new and state of the art. And we had to add a lot of information related to COVID to inform everybody what we were doing and what were the options for them. To get a feel on where to focus to get the necessary attention of our regular customers, and most of them were handcraft people, was yes, a big search. How do you get people to get interested in studying under conditions as they were? And then again, how to have people that are used to have a teacher in front of them focus on, for example, an e-learning longer than a few minutes. It was, that was really problematic. One of the best things we found to get people back into studying turned out to be the digital newsletter. We use that once a month, once in 2 months, but we started to work on that more frequently and put in everything that was successful during the process of how to start working on the COVID conditions. And to give you a simple example was, we started to do digital graduations on a university level at Dirkse, and it worked out nicely. So we put that into our newsletter. We put it on LinkedIn. We sent it out on Facebook, etc. We used our digital options the best we could. Lessons learned. What did we learn? In general, be prepared for the unexpected. It's easy to say, but we now walked in something very strange. So you have to be prepared, we found out, to be able to work under various conditions, COVID-19 or even worse, if that's possible. We need to provide training in various variations, and we have to teach our teachers accordingly. We need to be acquainted to using systems like this one, Zoom or Teams or the like, and we have to use them on a more than daily basis because there's far more to be taken out of it than you may know. And the most important one, which I already sent forward, is enlarge your digital footprint, use it to the max, and use every option you can find as a communication channel. It will help you to get your people and your organization forward. To end up, think out of the box and find your best options to adapt to changing surroundings, situations. And it may turn out to be very interesting and work out very smoothly. And to end this presentation, I will show you a little chart on how it turned out for us. As you can see, and as I already told, in April, we fell to nearly nothing. And we grew back to July even better than the last years. This is only possible when you have a motivated, focused and flexible personnel, and you are in a situation that you can still contact your customers and keep them very happy with what you are giving them. Thank you, and I'm open to questions now.
George, thank you so much. That was fascinating. What a challenge. We've got a lovely photograph of your family here.
Yes, and I stopped sharing that.
On your just when we were beginning to get to know you better. You've got people saying, let me ask you a question. The challenge, you said that you had gone from being in digital or distance education originally. You had then moved mostly into a classroom. The skills are very different. So the challenge must have been enormous when you found that you were suddenly trying to pivot and you needed, I presume, videographers and content creators. And how did that actually work? That would have been one of your big challenges, I would think.
Now, we knew, like you said, we used to be, but that's more than 20 years ago, we were most of the time a distance training organization. But then we turned out, we took over the telecom training, and then we grew into a practical organization. But the knowledge of distance training was kept alive by the university part and the middle management trainings we offered. So we did, and in due course we started to use e-learnings and things like that. But we were not always upfront with distance learning in the sense of virtual classrooms and things like that. So yeah, it was like bang, and then fortunately we had a few very, let's say, hip and young people who were very used to these systems, and they came up with all the new ideas. And then they said, well, this is all an option, this is an option. And they teach our teachers within the 2 weeks period to use the new systems. Then we were very lucky that we had young professionals with the latest technologies in their packages. So that was the way we worked.
And presumably it was those same young professionals who helped to expand your digital footprint then, because that would also be their area of expertise.
Yeah. Yeah, that was one of the problems we had at DERXA. We had to be, that's not so nicely to say, but we had a whole lot of elder people who were totally panicking, and we had a group of the young ones, and they said, "Wow, not a big deal. Let's start working on a different way." We already were busy going to the modern ways of working, but COVID brought in a big. It was like a pressure plan, and we had to adapt to the new situation which we were working towards, and looking for, let's say, a period of 4 or 5 years. That we did that in a few months now.
And when you talked about your digital footprint, you said your slide said your newsletter, which increased 2 or 3 times, you mentioned, but you said LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Did you mentioned the graduation, but was it all that sort of soft news that just got people interested in you? Was it advertising your courses? Was it a combination of both? Was it a very expensive or a very time consuming is really what I'm after.
It was very time consuming. It was both, it was everything. But I think the biggest part was the fact that like organizations, they needed to have new technicians. And the first reaction when COVID came was take everybody out of their courses and send them home and let them work. But then gradually they needed their extra training or their re-examining or whatever. And so the organizations came back themselves to say, well, okay, it's COVID, but can you make arrangements so that we still can train, that you can still train our people? So it is not a fact that we used more or better marketing. The biggest thing which set us back on track again was the need for trained people. And we were able to provide that in a new way. So the fact that a training that cost about 4 days in a classroom was now 2 days in the classroom and 2 hours or 4 hours e-learning and a few hours online training.
So you were fortunate that it was a combination of you being able to pivot to online training and actually your client companies realizing that they needed to pick up the training again. Your marketing then was geared mostly to existing customers to let them know that there was a new way that you could actually do it.
Yeah, right.
And did it affect then you said that it went from maybe 4 days in a classroom to 2 days online or whatever. Did that also have a cost implication?
Yes. In the end, we earned a lot less than what we used to. So yeah, that was a cost problem. And as you saw in the last chart, we really fell back a lot. We've up till now missing about 40% over the whole year. So yeah, it's costly, but we'll probably get back on the horse again.
And did you find that the cost was mostly in terms of creating the new courses, or it was that it was a lower cost to the people you were selling to?
Both, I think. I'm not absolutely sure at the moment. We've not we didn't went into the numbers up to now, but I'm sure this is both of them.
And in terms of looking forward then, George, the coming year and new clients coming on board, are you optimistic? Are you pessimistic? Will you do the same kind of marketing? Will you change it? What do you see happening?
Yeah, it's in our specific branch, we keep up with the marketing procedures we always used, and we're now looking for additional options. But yeah, as I already said in the beginning of my presentation, we are in a very specific niche market, and so we're always looking for additional options. But yeah, our clients are our clients for already 20 to more years. So it's a self-made group which need each other and can't work without each other. And okay, so we're into that business, and that's a risk in itself, because if one of our big clients falls over, then we got a problem.
But it's also a huge benefit that that pool of people will keep coming back to you over and over again.
We know our clients.
George, I love that insight. Thank you. We'll come back to you later. I'm going to move on to our second presenter, if I may. That was really, really insightful. Could I invite Niels Henrik Helms to join us? Niels, or Henrik, as he is called, is the Associate Professor for the National Centre for Vocational Education in the University College in Copenhagen. He has a long-standing track record of research and development work in ICT and learning. His main focus is on the relationship between media, learning, and innovation. Henrik, the floor is all yours. Take it away.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having this opportunity. I'll try to share my screen, and hopefully that will work. Yeah, I put up a PowerPoint slide show here. I'm Henrik Helms, as said, and I'm working at the University College in Copenhagen. And mostly I work with research and development work in the area of vocational education and training. And being here today, I'm also representing Fluid, which is the national Danish organization on open and distance learning, organizing all providers in this area. And Fluid is a member of the EADL, and I myself is a member of the Research and Development Committee at the EADL. So that is my background. I'll try to say something about presence and interaction online. And of course, this refers to the COVID-19 situation. But it also relates to my experiences, my development and research in distance learning for more than almost 30 years. So I have some background in this area, and it's very interesting now to see the changing occurring in a very short period of a few months. People being able to mount distance learning and doing the things which George was just talking about, and meeting some of the challenges you have always met when we are talking about distance learning. And I'll try to say something about that. And the background is, as I said, I'm a practitioner, I'm a researcher and developer in this area. And I made a number of interviews way back on different parts of distance learning, especially relating to vocational education and training and adult vocational and training. And I made a few interviews with young people participating in the teaching taking place here during COVID-19. And then I'm relating to a number of surveys already been produced in Denmark, looking into the experience of COVID-19. And referring shortly to what we have experienced ourselves, University College Copenhagen is a very big organization. We have more than 20,000 students and 2,000 employees, and we have changed a lot of teaching into distance learning and distance training and so on. And in my part of the organization dealing with vocational training and education, we provide diploma courses in vocational education and training, and the whole setup there was transformed within less than a week from being mostly physical to being online training. So that was very, very successful. And we actually had more students in that area during this period than we expected, and probably due to the fact that most of these people come from the commercial or technical colleges, and they didn't have so much activity, so they sent their teachers off to participate in these courses, which are compulsory for new teachers. So moving into the key area here, talking of presence, we should offer a learning environment and also learning trajectories which according to the learner's potential. We should offer them an option for presence. And presence is something which we take for given when we have a physical space, when we have a college or school, people enter that and then they know, well, here it is about education and about schooling and so on. But if we have a virtual setup, it's different. And here we need a much more appreciative and structured approach. And to some extent, you could say that is also often needed in a physical environment. And I would say that we need a kind strangeness. We need a strangeness because education is different from the practice people come from, but it should be a kind strangeness. It should be inviting, supporting, and scaffolding the learners and meeting them. So we have a space here, and whether it's physical or virtual, it have an impact on learning. It can and it should bring people together, and it should encourage exploration, collaboration, and discussion. But space can also carry an unspoken message of silence and disconnectedness. Space sort of sets the agenda, but space is not. And space should be, you could say, transformed into a place where people participate, where they are partners. But whether that is happening or not is very much a question of your approach as learning providers, how you sort of design your didactics. So when we have a virtual learning space, it must be made clear what is all this about, it, so it could be transformed from space to place. The learners, and we know that from a lot of research, if the part where the learner really learns something is when they enter into a context and sort of become part of it. So they should couple with it. They should couple with it. They should be part of it. That is the way we learn. When we meet something new, we sort of take it in and we sort of try to understand what is this all about. And if we don't do that, then we don't learn anything. Say that this should be a reciprocal process where it also works the other way around. And that is what presence is very much about. It's about becoming a learner, a student in a certain area. And if this is not happening, if there's no presence, then there will be no learning. And then when you go out and talk to people, is that happening in this process? How is this working when we move from a physical space into a virtual space? And I have some interviews here with, and these are young students from upper secondary school. And they say something like this: virtual learning works best with a common start and end. And that is partly because initially they experienced that the teachers were just giving them an assignment saying, well, you have to make this assignment and we'll have it back in a week or something. And that didn't work very well. It was first when they actually started using virtual conferences and so on, it started to work. So you should have a common start and end, and you should be sent out and do tasks, and you should do that in groups, collaboratively. And it's very, very important to know what is expected. I mean, when you're in a physical environment, the school, it's easier to read it, so to say. It's easier to understand what is expected here. But when it's virtual, you don't know. You have to find out. And this is where the providers, whether it's a college or course provider and so on, they should support and scaffold the learner. Then saying the teacher should not just ask people to speak up if they think they have an answer, but then, because then they end interrupting each other a lot. They should, and those who are polite, they don't participate. And I think they sort of reflect on the situation they often experience in a traditional classroom. And then they suggest that people should here just use use the system to say, well, we have an answer to this. And the other student here is saying something. According to this, virtual teaching has been a shortcoming, but there are also quite a few parts that work very well. There is less noise, which means teaching starts with teaching, and not a lot of different things taking place and so on. And for optimal virtual teaching, where the teachers are sure that all students have their attention on the teaching, the camera must be turned on. Here we are talking about virtual conferencing, and there has been some discussion on this, but according to these students, also according to the teachers I've been talking to and interviewing, and also my own teaching, it's very important that people are using the camera, that they sort of participate that way. Then they reflect in group work, and one should probably add that group work is very essential to the Danish concept of teaching. It's sort of the way we think teaching. It should happen in group. And in general, these two students think it works quite nicely. And it's nice when the teacher comes past. It could also be somewhat awkward, but in general, they like that. Yeah. So if we take this and some of the other things I have referred to, we could say that it's very important if you want to turn this into a learning experience. The opening is very important. You should create a context, a place where learning could take place, and you should be very explicit and very clear about what is going to happen, and you should sort of provide context by saying, well, here, this is where things are happening, and also stepping stone, we are moving toward this line. And you should also be very clear about roles, define what is the role of the student or the apprentice or the learner here, and when the roles are changing, when they have another role, then you should be explicit about that as well. And then, and as it is in all teaching and learning, you should have a good mixture and a good variation between different types of activities. And in general, people sort of like the breakout session where you sometimes randomly are put in a group to discuss things. And they think this works very nicely, and they sort of prefer to come out in such groups. And some of the system have very nice breakout tools built into the system, but all of the video conferencing systems I'm familiar with could provide for this in this way or another way. And then in the end, the evaluation part is very important. You could say these are some of the, if you should pinpoint something which sort of are important, if you want this to work, you could pinpoint some of these things. And then we also have the media and how to use the media. And the video conferencing systems have become extremely important here, much more important than they used to be in traditional distance learning, because there people have other motivations and other background. And then it's important with the feed forward and the feedback. You should acknowledge the learner, you should scaffold her or him, understand, and then you should understand the impact of written feedback, that if when you are in a virtual environment, the written feedback can be felt very unpleasant, because you don't have your body language or something else to sort of soften things up. So if you write something, it's very important you as a professional, you reflect on how you do that. And then you could use as a variation and to generate feedback online tools such as Mentimeter and so on. And we'll try that ourselves here in a short time. And then it's important to, and at least it's very good to create a common learning project where people can work collaboratively together, use media such as ThingLink and so on, sharing things with each other. And then lastly, I think it's very important to start to think about how could we start using e-portfolios much more. We had a sort of breakthrough with that some years ago, but in this situation where you work so much virtually, it's very important to have a thing which scaffold the individual's learning. So having e-portfolios or personal learning environments or whatever you want to call them might be the next issue to focus on. Then we have what it means to the teacher or the provider, whoever is arranging this. One could say these moved from being individual teachers to move into teams, and I will finalize on that. But if you should pinpoint some different aspects, some competences which become very important, then I think the stuff about being curating things, selecting, validating, and making openings. You have a lot of different digital media options and so on, and it's very important that the providers can choose the right things according to the learning objectives and to the participants you have, and validate them and understand that way. But then you should also be a kind of narrator, telling a story about what is taking place. And I emphasize this because it's very important in this regard, because this narration is sort of built into the physical education, but it's not built in here. So you have to tell a story about what is going on. And part of that is, of course, also being a champion, leading on and saying, well, motivating people, well, let's try this out and see what happens and so on. And then leading on, you should also be supporting, standing behind and helping people. And if you feel they have difficulties, you should ask them and so on. And then, as I said before, evaluation is very important. You have to pinpoint the learning. What have you learned here for the learner? So sort of scaffold the learner in having this turned into a learning process, but also evaluating at an organizational level. What did we as an education or as an institution or as a provider learn from these things? So it's very important to being present in various but relevant ways. And you could say this sort of changed the professionalism in all areas. If you take the teacher in the old days, they would have the same competence. Of course, some would teach German or mathematics or fitting if it's a technical course and so on. But basically, they should do the same thing. They should sort of deliver teaching, and that was it, and then maybe a little classroom management and so on. And they should do it apart from each other. But now they should use their different competences. They should be, some of them are very good at narration, some of them are very good at designing activities and so on. And all of them cannot be good at this, but this should be a common project for all of them. So they should become different, but they should work together. So I think that is the great change within, and especially probably in the public education institutions, because by private providers, there's been more a tradition of having some people who were course developers and others who were trainers and so on. But in educational institutions, we especially public, we see a new way of working together and new competences being needed among the teachers and at the end of the day also among educational management.
About 1 minute left, Henrik. So,
having a blast with distance learning, my son made a book on what he experienced during COVID-19, and one of the pages was this about distance learning. He was participating not by his free will, but because he was asked to in a distance learning course, and he has illustrated in this way. So, thank you.
Wow, there were so many questions raised in that presentation. Thank you, Henrik. Can I ask you one that immediately springs to mind? You were talking about the fact that if you're going to be present and you're trying to create a presence virtually, that I suppose replicates a classroom where people are actually talking to each other and seeing people. You said that you recommend cameras on for all pupils at all times, but anything that I have seen on research from the tutor's point of view says that it's very difficult for the tutor to actually look at that amount of faces and to monitor that amount of faces at the same time. Any advice from a tutor's perspective?
Of course, there's a limit, upper limit to that, but if you have maybe like 25 or 30, you're capable of that. And it's also about making this something which you share in the group of students or pupils or whatever you have. And meaning when you blacken your screen, you sort of leave the presence which have been there before, and it annoys especially the other students, because they suspect that they are not participating anymore and they are doing different things and so on.
We have a question from Jeremy Lucas who says, teaching online, he has found that the optimum length for an online lesson is about 25 minutes. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it depends on what you mean by that, because of course, in general, you would say that when you're doing teaching activities, each activity should not be less than 20 minutes, and the same thing applies for here. But it's extremely important that you have sort of changes in time slots and so on, and you shouldn't do anything longer than 20 minutes. Even if you have a group work and things like that, you shouldn't exceed much more than 20 minutes, because then it's very difficult to focus when you're talking about distance learning.
And how long of a break before you come back into your next 20-minute session then?
Well, it's not necessarily a long break, but you should do something different. You could have doing something together in the virtual classroom, so to say, and then you could have breakout groups and so on. And of course, you should also have 5-minute breaks and so on in between. But the important thing is to sort of change the modus during the whole session, and don't do much more than 2 hours all in all for such a session.
And just one other question for you. We train our teachers to teach online. Should we train students in online etiquette as well?
Yeah, I think so.
So what do they need to know? What are they lacking?
Well, they lack the understanding of that they have to articulate themselves in a different way. And we are spending a lot of time, or we are using a lot peer feedback and so on. But here we as the institution have to train the students, because otherwise they are too impolite or too polite towards each other. They can't just give each other feedbacks as such, because they have not been trained for it, meaning that either they sort of saying, well, this is very nice and being too polite, or they say, this is very stupid, you haven't understand anything. And especially if you have young people, they become too rude, and if we're talking about other adults, they become too polite. But if it should be beneficial to have peer feedback, then you should of course focus on the subject matter and so on. But that is also a question of training people to sort of describe the situation, analyze the situation, and then evaluate the situation instead of just starting by evaluating, saying this is good or bad and so on.
That's my takeaway for today, Henrik, that if you're too young, you're inclined to be too rude, and if you're too old, you're inclined to be too polite. We have 2 more comments just before I close, and then we're going to go into a quick quiz. One from George, who says, we use 2-hour sessions with interaction activities every 4 or 5 minutes and a 10-minute break at the end of the first hour, and it's well received. And a second from Mitch saying, beyond 45 minutes, you really have to have a break. 30 minutes, he finds, is a good rule of thumb for a presentation, and 2 hours, he's agreeing, is the absolute upper limit. Henrik, thank you so much for that. Yeah. I'm going to ask Chris to pop up the first of our polls, please, because I forgot about it earlier. My apologies. And if you could all just answer this poll as quickly as possible so that we can move on to our third speaker. Thanks, Henrik.
Thank you.
And Chris, what curious and interesting questions do you have for us that you need us to participate in?
Is the poll not appeared on the screen, Ellen?
No, it hasn't. No.
Oh, give me a second. Here. Sorry.
That's okay. We could pretend we answered. Now we got a poll.
Yes.
Super. Thank you. You can tell that I don't do any of the technology. I just do the talk. Everybody else makes it happen. And Chris and Tony are working furiously in the background to make sure that all of the technology does what it's supposed to do. How have you been affected by COVID-19? Very interesting question. Very positive. Yeah, for some businesses it was great. Positive. Neutral. Was there anybody neutral? Negative or very negative? Okay, it's a single question poll, Chris. So do you want to let me know when you're happy that you have sufficient responses, or can we give people another few minutes?
Just a couple still coming through. Just give me 30 seconds and then I'll share the results on screen.
No problem, because we're curious to know. Because COVID has actually divided businesses generally, and the response, like worldwide, across businesses has been either very positive or very negative. In training, my gut feeling is that if you were already in online or distance training, that it has actually been positive or very positive for you, because online and distance learning is the new black. And that if, like George, you were actually in the physical training, it became positive because of enormous effort on your part. So what have we got? Neutral 38%. That's really surprising. So for almost half of the people, well, neutral and negative are almost the same. So it either had no impact or it was a negative impact. Nobody was very negatively impacted. Okay, they've all gone away. They've changed industry. Positive for 19% and very positive for 9%. Very, very interesting. Very interesting.
A couple of comments in the chat, Ellen, regarding the poll, if you want to have a quick look.
Let's have a look and see. Teachers complained more work than in the classroom. I'm not getting a comment here on the poll, Chris.
That was the, I assume the teachers...
generally more work with same income or less. Interesting. And yes, faculty have had a very difficult time. COVID has created all sorts of HR issues, says Christos, and Penelope Ross says, personally, it was very negative. That's an interesting one. That how have you been affected by COVID-19? I presumed the question referred to the business, you the business, and not you the individual. Very good point, Penelope. And she says personally negative, but work very positive. That's it. There's a whole other poll there to be done. Positive and negative impact, says Andrea. Working online prior to COVID was good, but now that everyone's online, it's too crowded. Yolanda, you absolutely nailed it. You nailed it, girl. And Zanette says, yes, beyond just the classroom context. Very interesting feedback there. Very interesting. Keep them coming, please. Let me introduce our third speaker, if I may. She is Professor Gilly Salmon. And Professor Salmon is founder and CEO of Education Alchemists, a company founded around her life's work, including Carpe Diem learning design methodology, pedagogical transformation, online teaching, technology-enhanced learning, the 5-stage model, and E-tivities, not activities, E-tivities. She's going to offer us some insights into old and new challenges. I'll hand over to you, Gilly.
Hi everyone, thanks very much for the introduction. I'm just going to share screen so we have a few pictures. Can you see that okay, everyone?
Yep, that looks great.
Okay, thank you. So thanks, Ellen. As you said, I've worked in this field for a long time, and my role has been very much about working mainly with universities, but also in the sort of training and development sector, and in the social impact sector with my learning design work and similar. And I've always been a little bit of an amateur futurist, looking back to looking forward. So this was a great question for me. And so many things have rung true about what people have been discussing and talking about already. So thank you very much, George and Henrik. So here are some of my thoughts on what's happened with the old challenges coming forward and perhaps either being revisited or rediscovered, and what some of the new ones are. So that's what I'm going to have a bit of a go at and would be most interested in your thoughts. This is from a paper I actually published about a year ago, before COVID struck the world. And it was based on mapping the changes in education from the birth of the modern university, so it goes back 1,000 years, then superimposing web developments on it, and also the industrial revolutions as the push towards universities and others providing skills for the future, and the very strong link with the economy. So if any of you are particularly interested in that, I've put the link up there. It is a completely open link in the wonderful Journal of Learning for Development, so you can read it all. And I'd be delighted if you did that, because it does take quite an up-to-date approach just before this new emergency struck us, which I'd put about there. So clearly the challenges of transformation, of staying with the times, of optimizing the technology of the day, of creating graduates fit for the future, of then training them to be able to fulfill their roles, none of that is new. But it's typically been done in particular contexts and particular ways. And I think, like the other two speakers and all of you listening, we have had both business impact and we've had personal impacts. And these were the two that the four that I think probably have had the most impact on my transformational work. This idea of lack of control and probably, you know, challenges to politicians, business leaders, to us as teachers. Well, you should have known what to do, shouldn't you? you know, I've heard people say this whole feeling of lack of control, which we know for our mental and our business health is just the worst thing. And I was one of the people who have found this very positive, although extremely challenging. And it's brought home to me how much, you know, sort of we cannot really control the way the world is going. We do not know exactly what trajectory we're on at any one time. And so all the systems thinking, all the idea of complex adaptation, where suddenly things come in from time to time, is the very best thing we should be teaching curriculum wise, regardless of our discipline, regardless of our training, regardless of the outcomes that we're aiming for in terms of skills. The second one, I think, is this whole viability of traditional education, certainly in higher education, has come into question. And the idea that you have to meet in order to be able to educate someone else, to be able to work together, is really, we always knew, those of us who have been in this field, that wasn't the case, but we knew it was different, just as you've heard really from Heinrich and others. But all of a sudden, it looked non-viable. I mean, in the UK, certainly there's huge anxiety about who's going to come back, who's going to want to travel, who's going to come back to a physical university, and how can we offer alternatives to them. So again, I don't think that's a new challenge. It was already becoming less and less appropriate if you look towards Education 4.0, but all of a sudden everything accelerated. And you heard George's, well, we went from 2 days to within a week we had this, and look what it did for his business in a matter of months. So probably the most important thing is our ability to be flexible and not to cast too many glances backwards, really, to inform the future. Number 3, I think, is for me, from my research, is the whole student expectations. Students were already telling us that for them, online was a place to be social, a place to learn, a place to be, a place to connect. And how come they weren't able to put their university in their pocket? And I won't answer that question just now, but you know, online is a place and can solve questions. And of course it's different. The idea of presence and connection and the way we structure the learning, which I'll come to in a minute, is definitely different. But the students' expectations were based on the idea, well, actually, if you're going online and you're not doing it better, what's happening to my learning? What's happening to the commitment that I've made to this university that is no longer there as a physical space? And so there's a whole range of things around that are very important. And my 4th one was this sort of super forced fast pivot, which has been an opportunity to work on all these lines that are going like this and then take us forward, but it must be to a better place. So these kinds of discussions, and many like them, are really, really important because we make sure that when we regroup, we find that we have got something better that is dealing with all those old challenges sooner and better than it would have been without them. So that was my lightning strikes. When the whole thing happened, I was actually in South America. I think I got the last flight out of Quito. Managed to get back to Amsterdam, and then it was more difficult to get from Amsterdam to London after that, with the borders closing behind me. But I was extremely lucky to get back, and my business has gone entirely digital, and that has been very appropriate, I think. that it's really good that we practice what we preach, us distance learners, I think. So at the moment, amongst other things that I'm doing, I'm looking at what happened in the emergency, that how people stepped up in the most extraordinary way. And you heard one story from George, our first speaker today, but there are similar stories that have happened in just about every country in the world, throughout every educational sector. I was facilitating on a Future Learn, a huge Future Learn about learning, would have been about beginning of April, I think, and there were school teachers all over the world from primary onwards who were looking to concepts and ways that they could borrow from what we already knew that they could now apply to their very different situations. So I think there's the pivot going on was what we did in the emergency, which was really emergency education, and the fact everyone is recognizing that now. And this was an interview I did extremely recently with a university in New Zealand, and I tell you, they know about emergencies and the lack of place, because they had the massive earthquake there, and the university fell around their ears, so there was no returning for quite some time. And then they've had another atrocity actually in Christchurch, and now this. And so I thought they were the super best place to say, how do we deal with coming through this kind of thing? And these were their summaries of what happened. For the staff, they did really feel that they had a strong lack of knowledge and of how to put it into practice around distance and online learning. The whole communication with their students got more difficult, and the ways they'd done it for years and the ways they themselves had learned. You know, the way that what's brought all of us to this place now has been based on a different experience. So we need, as educators, to get out of our own personal experiences and use a more conceptual approach that we can understand in a wider sense. They found the whole question of deadlines, how do you actually get people to do something by a particular time, very difficult. And that was very interesting that they said that to me. But I knew really from my research that you do have to produce, the time happens very differently, both asynchronously and synchronously in the online environment. They were worried about the integrity of assessment, everything from who was helping the students or to whether they were assessing the same students they were teaching. And I think there are solutions to that. Again, lots of different approaches, but people need to know about those. Their own availability and hours, and I know this, I mean, nearly everyone was homeschooling, less probably in New Zealand than we were maybe in Europe, but the schools actually closed here in London quite early on. So I was certainly schooling my grandchildren along with running my usual workshops and so on across the world. So it did become a bit 24-hour-ish, with the children getting the best of the morning, I think. And then the whole life pressures changed, didn't they? So, you know, we all had to think through every aspect of our daily life, and doing our job was part of that. So that's what came out of that interview, which was last week, on, you know, emergency education. The students, their expectations were that, you know, you turn up in class, you know what to do, you know who your teachers are, you know who your classmates are, you know where the library is, you know where your working space is. That all had to be rethought. And certainly in the UK, there's been some challenge to, well, you're not giving me what I wanted. And that's been very worrying. And space to work became an issue for a lot of students, and questions of equity and so on. the fact that they, with the very best of intentions, they had to become more self-directed. Now, at university level, we strive for that anyway, but it came more of a problem. The issue of equipment, broadband, value for money, and of course, the issue of social isolation. So those were, I think, some of the big immediate challenges, of which when I look back on some of the old challenges that we faced and came up with solutions, are now being brought to bear as we come into the immediate, beyond the immediate emergency. So one of the ways I think many of you will know the understanding of threshold concepts, because it's a really valuable idea when you're teaching students to help them to become more confident and competent and get them ready for the skills or the profession they're going to need in the future. It's not just learning outcomes. It can inform the way you teach to get them through a portal, to make them more like you. They're not easy to get at, because all of us will have gone through thresholds in our own chosen disciplines, and therefore it's quite hard to look back and remember what it was like not to know them. And that's really what we're all having to do now as educators, as trainers, as those trying to help others to make these transformations and to be more flexible in the future. So I've used this concept to help us to understand what's required. So here's a quick one for you on my threshold concepts for the pivot. That certainly in the university sector, it was very much the lone wolf idea, the subject matter expert, the professor. And in the university or in the training center, it was around the number of hours you were going to do something and how you were going to fill that time. And everything was really thought about as a play space and lecturer focused, and schedules and timetables. It was all structured around the needs of the buildings. Rather than anything else. Any of you who've worked in universities will know what I'm talking about here, I'm sure. And now, all of a sudden, to do the optimum to digital learning, we actually need to work in teams, and we need to design learning in a different sort of way and deliver many times. And if you design, then you can put in all the things that George and Henrik were talking about, because it's designed in. It's a plan, but it needs to be a co-design. It needs to be between all the different stakeholders. It's not something you do on your own. But the big advantage, you can then deliver many times. And you do need to produce scaffolds. You do need structure, and you do need more pacing, not less, when people are working remotely. And if you only remember that from what we've talked about today, I think that will make a big difference. Don't busk it, plan it. And that's what pedagogy is. It's creating the pathway. Teaching online, yeah, it's different. There's more process, there's more need for feedback. Just a little tip that voice feedback works very well and is quicker to do than written feedback. And then there's two issues that I'm going to say a little bit more about, is when you're designing for distance learning, the issue of equivalence is really important, and the issue of alignment is really important, and both of those feed into your structure. So I hope everybody's...
Julie, you're speaking for about 15 minutes at the moment.
Okay, I will be about 5 minutes. Is that okay, Ellen?
We'll give you about 3.
Okay, righto. I will speed up, I've nearly done. So a lot of people are discovering or rediscovering a lot of the work that I've done over a long period of time. So because I've overrun in my time, I'll just give you the websites for these. One is Carpe Diem, which is a team-based approach to learning design, which incorporates all those ideas. Another is an easy way of adopting a workable scaffold, which is the 5-stage model, and you'll find that on my website too. And another one is activities, which are small pieces of learning that are highly interactive and active for students to do in the online environment. You can put them into entirely digital, or you can put them into blended learning, and they're useful for every level and every discipline. The equivalence is the key here, is use the same learning outcomes as you did for always, but expect to have to change your mode of learning. So don't suddenly try and change everything you're aiming for, but accept that you're going to have to design and deliver differently. And the alignment means that you promote a very transparent, active environment so the learner can construct his or her way through that, and it's kind of obvious where they're going from the beginning. That's all people mean by pedagogy, really. So those are my solutions to the lightning strikes that we experienced, and that's what I'm bringing forward to help people to deliver them. So thanks for listening. Happy to discuss it. How am I doing?
I'm sorry for rushing you through that.
No, that was fine. That was fine.
I have to tell you, Jilly was the person who said, I'm going to be short. I'll have time
I
left
know.
over. I'll be 10 minutes. And then I'm watching the clock thinking, no, she's getting too dug into it.
Sorry.
That was absolutely
Okay.
fascinating. No,
I'll stop the share so we can discuss, shall I? But everyone's going to get the slides, aren't they? They're on and the recording.
Yeah. Let me ask you one question about delicate people. The students that are entering universities now at the moment seem to be the most delicate generation we've ever had. They need constant reinforcement. They're very unsure of everything. The isolation is going to be a huge issue for them. How do you see universities actually tackling that?
Well, I think there's as the universities that I know in the UK and the ones I'm working with around the world, which are in lots of different locations, everyone seems to be doing an approach to getting students back where they can, but making sure they've got everything online, but not just resources and not just Zoom. Hopefully this next stage will include much more structuring and much more support to students in a whole variety of ways. So I think students really, if you do this properly, students can benefit enormously by having their university in their pocket, regardless of where they are. And that, of course, includes their classmates and their lecturers and their tutors. So I'm one of the hopeful ones at the moment.
It's a super idea, a university in a pocket. It's marvelous. Let me break you there if I can. I'm going to invite the others to join us back, but I'm also going to ask Chris if you want to pop up that second poll that you wanted us to have a look at. So we might do that very quickly. We have nothing at the moment.
Sure, you go.
Super. Has this webinar been useful? I can almost tell you what the answer is going to be already because there are so many questions on the chat line. It's incredible. But let me give people a few minutes.
I'm just going to pop off while you're doing that to get a book because somebody's asked me about threshold concepts.
We'll give you another few minutes. So has the webinar been very useful, somewhat useful, or not useful? Well, could I just say on behalf of the moderator and the three speakers, we've been brilliant, but we'd like to know, Chris and Tony would like to know whether or not it's been of benefit to you, because we've had a ball doing this so far. It's whether or not you feel you actually got any benefit from it. Are we doing there, Chris?
Yeah, I'm going to share the results now.
Super. So 47% very useful, 38% useful, and 16% somewhat useful. I think overall we'd be fairly pleased with that. Let me try and give you some of the questions that have come in. We've questions that came in advance and some that are coming in at the moment. The one that caught my eye was attention to detail. How important is attention to detail online? Things like spelling, which would drive me mad, but I'm of that age group that a typo will jump out at me quicker than anything else. Who wants to take the question of how important is the detail?
Whoa.
George.
I think the detail is always very important, but you shouldn't ask me because I'm dyslexic, so I always miss parts in my own presentations. But the answer is it's very, to us, it's very essential. That doesn't mean failures or faults are excluded always.
But something that you should be, I would think it goes with just being a professional, that if
Yeah.
you're presenting something to people, the professional way to present it is without typos or errors or whatever. I'm not sure, Henrik, I might pass the next one to you if I can. Postgrad or undergrad, which is better suited to online learning?
I think the good answer to that is depends.
Okay, well, tell me a little bit more than it depends. You're not getting away with that one.
Yeah, but I mean, it depends on what you, when you talk about online learning, you very often see it as a double learning process. On the one side, you have to sort of live in a digital life and understand what that means as part of it. And on the other hand, you have a specific subject matter. And if you take young people in general, they're very familiar with social media and so on, but they also need to understand that when you're in a professional setup, when you're learning something together with others, the rules and the settings there are different. So for them, it's a very important learning process about not only how to learn in virtual learning, but also how to behave in virtual learning. And I think that is very useful. If we talk about 100% online learning, I think in general that would be more suitable for adults than for young people. And sometimes people speak about what they call blended learning, and I don't like that expression very much, because I think all learning or all teaching nowadays are blended somehow. I don't see very much which is not blended in any way, and it also gives some wrong pictures when you talk about blending things, so on. So the answer would be yes, in general, I would say it's more suitable for adults, but it is also very important to use online environment for young people, to train them, because it is the way they'll be going to learn in the years coming.
Thank you for that. Let me bounce one to Jilly if I can. There's one that came in earlier, Jilly, and it's from, let me see, Frederick Deli. And he said, at our school, we'll be operating in a hybrid mode where 1/3 of the students will be physically present in the classroom and another 2/3 will be attending online. This will be done on a rotation basis in 3 groups. How should the interactions with online students during a live class be managed? How much attention to those online, how much attention to those
Well,
present?
I think that's very interesting, because I think there are some key features of working online that are now being incorporated into these hybrid modes. So you still need the structure of those who are in the classroom as well. The activities, you do need to allow people to go through them and then do summaries and what we call weaving. So it's putting all the contributions together and then the teacher doing the summary at the end. And you must take that from both locations. So that really works extremely well, assuming that's what they mean. And the other thing is that feedback works best, is quickest for teachers with voice. Rather than trying to write. So I think you'll find that if you pick up some of the key things that you need to be a moderator in the online learning environments, it will work just as well where you've got hybrid modes of people coming in. I think when you first start doing it, it is quite challenging not to give priority to the students that are in front of you, assuming that's where you are. So I think you have to train yourself a bit on that, and it takes a bit of practice to be fully inclusive of everyone. And we're starting to see that quite a bit in conferences now as well. Good luck with that one. That sounds great, actually, doesn't it? It sounds a good idea.
It sounds a great idea, but I can understand how difficult it is to actually manage it. And even from a tutor's point of view, how do you keep an eye to what's happening in 2 different locations? Henrik, I might circle back, George, I'm circling back towards you. But Henrik, I might ask you about the instructor's cognitive load. How much of the instructor's cognitive load should be devoted to checking for inputs and questions and managing interactions versus moving the discussion in the classroom? It's very related to what Jilly has just answered.
Yeah, it's difficult to put a percentage on that, but of course, if you invite people in to give feedback and so on, you should also attend to it. But I think you should structure it in a way as a teacher that you can cope with both. Very often when we do online courses, we sort of have a co-teaching, and we have one who is presenting and one who is attending to the commentaries and so on. But of course, that is a question of resources as well.
Okay, and let me come back to you, George, if I may, because the other question, which probably links into your teaching as well, is suggestions for live case study discussions, Harvard style. How do you actually keep, how does it work? How do you keep both online and in-class students involved and engaged? Can you do a live interactive case study with students?
We're at the moment we are practicing the situation you're describing with our university classes, as a lot of them don't want to join in the classroom, so they're divided. Few are at home, and if they want to, they are allowed to come to a maximum of 8. But we in real life we haven't practiced that yet, so we're planning it. And yeah, I think it's a sort of not a sort of a problem. It will be problematic to get everybody's attention at the same time, and it will be very stressful for the teachers, because Jilly and Hendrik, they said, well, it's optional and we should train for it, but in practice it's very tiring.
And it's difficult to know how you can teach that skill to all teachers. Some, I would imagine, will be better at it than others.
True.
It's a learning curve we're all on. We have a question in from Penelope. She said, may I ask a question to the panelists? How can I reconcile lesson planning online versus at the same time as instructional design? Many models are similar for both. Any takers on that one? Reconcile lesson planning online versus at the same time as instructional design.
Right, I think it's the difference between designing. In other words, we would make sure we've got our brief for what we're designing for, the types of students, the learning outcomes, the threshold concepts. Then we would do a storyboard so the whole thing hangs together. And then we would actually build the online element of it. So I think that's what she means. The instructional design comes after you've done the pedagogical design, and then you would build the online parts of it. I'm not sure whether that's what she means, but that's what I mean between designing once and then delivering many times.
Henrik, anything to add there?
I think, yeah, I think it's very important, and it relates back to the quality issue before. And of course, we should have a very high quality, and it comes with professionalism, as you said yourself. And I think we should have a core which is very well quality assurance and so on. But we also know that the flexibility and the changes in providing things mean that sometimes we don't have time for that. So we very often work with a model where we have a sort of core which is quality assurance, and then we have something which is related to the individual course and the course teacher. They're making videos and so on, which maybe don't have the technical quality as the rest of it, but they are adequate in this very relationship they are being used in at this particular course.
George, I might bounce back to you with a question about coming back into the autumn. Are people more likely, you mentioned in your presentation earlier that there was too much noise when COVID happened first, that there was too much going on in people's lives, that they just couldn't focus on anything, never mind training. Coming back into the autumn, it's the time of the year when people traditionally think about taking courses and settling down to study again. Do you think there's still too much noise going on? Universities are different because it's a different structure, but for training, for corporate training, do you think it's likely to settle down? Or do you think, have people accepted that COVID is here for a long time, or are they still very unsettled?
first thing is that I think that the fact that COVID will stay for a longer time and that we have to adapt to the situation we're living in now has more or less landed. In addition to that situation, everybody knows that we can't get together with large groups, so we accept that it will probably in the near future be a little bit more expensive to join trainings. And in addition to that, I think training will, well, yeah, I think that training will in the autumn and after that be more and more coming back, and we see it in our business that people waited till COVID was disappearing. Now it's not disappearing, so they start to come back anyway under certain conditions. And at the moment, like I showed in my chart in the end of my presentation, we are more or less back to business, but I'm not sure whether that will uphold after August, September. We hope so. In our planning, it looks like it will keep up during the period at least until December, but then you don't know what is happening to other businesses due to the COVID influence.
Have you factored in future planning the fact that there may be a second wave of COVID and how that might affect your training?
No, we're still let's say financially prepared for another wave, and hopefully it will not be the same large wave as it was in March, April. But yeah, we are more or less prepared for another wave, hopefully.
Which seems reasonable, and hopefully it won't land. Let me come back to Henrik and Gilly if I can. Student expectation of college, you both raised it in different ways. The experience of college, and I think Gilly, you probably focused on this most, is that students it's learning, it's societies, it's campus, it's dorms, it's all of that atmosphere that's around a university. If universities can't actually replicate that as a new normal, will the actual physical buildings like New Zealand simply disappear? Will there be no need for them? Will it become a university in your pocket?
What do you think, Henrik? I think it's still endemic. I mean, that original diagram I put up is that universities have been place-based for more than 1,000 years. And it's almost embedded in our psyche that you go to university, I'm going to uni, you know. And I think that it would have to change quite dramatically and is part of our culture. So I don't think that's going to change overnight, but I think it will change over time. And as I said, I think it's being accelerated by what's happening to us now. But the expectations of students at the moment are still sitting there with their mouth open, waiting to be fed, I think.
Henrik, what's your take on it?
I think in general, the students are longing to come back. We recently had a setback in Aarhus, the second largest city in Denmark, and they had to close down all the educational institutions, and the students went out to demonstrating to be allowed to go back to college, which was somewhat amusing for some of the people there, but it means that they really want to go back. But on the other hand, I've heard several students, and I overheard one conversation with some from what should we call it, upper secondary vocational education, saying, well, we want to go back to college, but we don't want to go back to college as it was before COVID-19. We want to have some of the good things with distance learning, things that we don't have to show up every day at 8 o'clock and stay there until 4 o'clock. So they want a more mixed mode. So I think we can learn something from this. Mm. And then we have the question of what is sometimes called the weak learners, and there's been a lot of people have been very worried about people who are not so good at learning, and how would they cope with this, and to some extent there's also a social issue there which Gilly touched upon. And of course, if you live in a home where you don't have the opportunity to have a space where you can learn, it's a problem. but we also have some findings which suggest that some of the people there find it less stressful to participate in online learning activities, because the pressure of being marching together with the other at the same momentum, but they're allowed to learn at their own pace more. So we should also learn from that. I think they've felt that they're more protected in this way of learning, and also the fact that that the teachers or whoever it is have been asked to put out what is exactly wanted here and what should you do here and what is the expected outcome, has sort of scaffolded in their learning process. So they've found it to be beneficial in that way. So I think we can also, in traditional teaching, we can learn a lot from the experiences here.
There's a very interesting comment from Mitch Spiegel. He says, high percentage of US college freshmen have postponed their entry into college by a full year in order to experience the in-person aspects. It's very interesting. I was actually listening to a conversation on radio, and there was a woman who was seeking counseling from one of these doctors who was appearing on the radio for her child who was going into secondary school. She was 13 and she wanted to postpone secondary school for a year because she wasn't sure that she would be able to make friends and connect with new people if she had to hold this social distancing. How much of a phenomenon do you think it's likely to be that college freshmen can say, I'll take a year out, I'll travel, can't really travel the world, but I'll do something different, and then I'll come into college next year, I'll wait, I'll sit it out and see, does somebody find an antidote for the virus? Can I actually go back to that old college experience that Gilly referred to that they still love so much? What do you think, Henrik?
But I think that this is a very natural reaction to this. But first of all, I'm not too sure that they'll be able to return to the college which they're expecting to return to. And secondly, I've seen from most of the educational institutions in Denmark, they have focused especially on newcomers into the educational institution, making activities for them, whether they are physical or online, because it's very important to sort of become part of the educational institution. If you have been there for 1 year or 2 years and then experience this, you are still part of the institution. But I think if people don't do something very, very extraordinary here, you will have a very high dropout rate, either because people drop out or, as you are suggesting here, people don't start at all. I haven't seen the figures from Denmark. I don't think we have a very clear picture of that, people postponing their start right now. I don't know. Thank you.
It's a very interesting one that you mentioned dropout. I'm going to come to you on this one, Gilly, because there's a question in from Christos saying it would also be interesting to see the rate of dropouts this year for students who found that their courses were completely interrupted and then said, look, I'm just not going back, I'll do something different.
I don't think we have that information yet. I've been working with a number of universities who had serious difficulties in completing students. One example would have been in health, where, you know, place-based placements, you know, sort of internships and research to practice and that kind of thing. So one of the things that I'm doing at the moment was doing a whole series of workshops enabling people to create virtual placements, because obviously all the range from medical to all the allied health, they all have clear ideas of what you've got to meet before you can graduate. And a lot of people were not graduating because they were missing that element. So I think, again, people are stepping up and solving those kinds of problems on a mass scale. And we're starting to get interest from all over the world on how to do sort of virtual placements. So I'm not sure that there may be some delays in graduation, but I haven't heard of that many people dropping out. Certainly, I've got a granddaughter who's in her first year doing psychology in a UK university, and she was horrified when she had to come home. And she was just devastated in her first year. But she's going back okay, and they just accept the social distancing that's got to be involved in that. But she's still going back and living in halls and residences and you know, she's just open to solving it in order to be there. So there was no question of her dropping out, but it, you know, I'm sure some people did, don't you think?
Interesting, we're getting lots of feedback here. So in Norway, Carrie Olstad says, we have a record high number of new students this autumn.
Interesting.
Uwe Matthias Richter says in the UK, applications are up partially because the options for gap years or going directly into the job market is limited because of COVID-19.
Yeah.
Oh, very smart. I hadn't thought of that. That the other options that are go to college or do what else have actually been closed down. Penelope Ross says, I'm a health lecturer. This has caused problems, but we can provide VR and simulation. Very interested in virtual placements. And that's become a huge thing from a business point of view. The number of interns that we've been offered as virtual interns. And actually there's a whole question there. I don't know which one of you wants to take this one, but there's a whole question there about how you select people for virtual internships. Because from my own business, we've always taken interns in, and we found there's a big difference once you take a virtual intern, that some of them are just natural self-starters. They kick in, they want to get the experience, they do the job, and others, I don't know what they do all day. And we just don't have the interest in, like, if you're not interested in doing it, we're not going to chase you. If you don't want to learn, you just sit at home and pretend you're doing something. George, is internship something that is part and parcel of your teaching?
Yeah. Yes, we use that, but not so often. And to get people start to the internship at Dirkse, yeah, they need to be here. There's not an option for us at the moment to have them doing things virtual. To be honest, everybody working at the office since the 1st of July again. So we're all back to regular business.
It's interesting because certainly from an Irish point of view, the advice still is that if you don't need to work from an office, don't. So we haven't been inside our offices since March. Everybody, absolutely everybody is remoting. The question is, why are we paying for the building at all? But that's a whole other issue.
Well, a lot of people are not, I think. Yeah, a lot of people are closing down a lot of things.
I have to add to my story. We do have a lot of space here in our offices. So the first rule is you have to be able to keep at least 1.5 meter distance from each other. Now we can successfully be at least 6 meters apart, and that counts for everybody. And we can even walk around the building and stay
wow.
far away from everybody. But it's a luxury. And fortunately, we have that condition. In the classrooms in our locations where we teach, it's a different story. But then we use masks and all kind of things, extras. And we walk beside each other, alongside each other, back to back, and things like that. But yeah,
it's a very interesting dilemma. We were actually looking for larger offices when COVID happened, and now we don't think we need larger offices at all. So we're just sitting and waiting. Let me give you some closing comments before I come back to Tony. Maria Spilker says, in Portugal, number of candidates for university was the highest ever this year. So maybe students are actually seeing university as one of the few options. They can't take their gap year and travel the world and be a hippie or whatever they do. So really they don't have much option around that. Another comment from Uwe Matthias Richter, I hope I'm pronouncing that name the right way, I'm sure I'm butchering it. And one of the biggest challenges we find with online / blended learning is how to deliver and support practice-based learning, including degree apprenticeships. So how do you support? I'll take that as the closing comment. Supports, and I'll broaden it out a little if I can. I'll give each of the three of you an opportunity just for a brief closing comment. How do you actually offer additional supports, or what additional supports do you need to offer to people who study with you in order to make them more comfortable with the experience? Gilly, I might start with you if I can.
Well, I just mentioned there about the virtual placements, but again, I'll go back. You design in the whole experience. So you start with thinking of it as a whole experience. You don't add on different bits. And then you work out how the learning has to happen in different places, and as flexibly as possible. So if you can no longer be in the place, you've always got an alternative ready. And you do that by storyboarding. So think storyboarding like you would for a movie, but you're actually imagining someone going through that over either a whole degree, and I've just been doing quite a lot of design on degree apprenticeships and dealing with this specifically. So it's not a matter of saying, well, what support do we need? It's a whole learning experience that leads to the outcomes you're looking for. So hope that makes sense.
Don't think support, says Gilly, think storyboard like a movie, like that one. Henrik, what would supports, additional supports?
We ask the students to bring in what we call a practicum challenge. So they are in actual practice at a technical college or commercial college, and they should bring in a challenge from their own teaching, whether online or on campus, and we use that as a sort of the core of the teaching, and that has become quite successful after implementing that. So we try to combine the practice with the theories they're being taught.
So bringing a challenge, bringing some of their real life experience into college, so that it makes it more real for them.
They have to describe it and so on. So it's not just an idea, but it's a more thick description of what they are actually facing in their practice.
Very interesting. George, I give you the final word on this one. Supports, additional supports for your learners?
Now, we were already busy with things like virtual reality, if that is an option. For us it is, to have people be able to have visited locations before they have ever been there. So you can't, that's our problem. We can't train people in welding in virtual reality. That's too expensive for us. It probably is an option, but it's really expensive. So the best thing before that is having people given the opportunity to, well, like I said, visit locations or look at a certain situation before they do it in real life. So that's the way we use those options.
I think what's been most fascinating from today is that nobody actually has the answer, but everybody has a multiple range of solutions and options and ways of looking at things. And I think I've thoroughly enjoyed this session. Thank you for sharing your insights. I think what it has given all of us is an insight into a world that nobody can fully see yet in terms of education and training, but it's a very bright future. There certainly is much more education and training to be done. Just none of us are exactly sure what shape that will take in 2021 and beyond. Thank you to all three speakers. I've thoroughly enjoyed moderating this session. Can I now introduce you to Tony Horsfield, who is the Executive Director of EADL, and he's going to formally close the conference today. Tony.
Thank you. It's just reminded me that I'm supposed to be a distance learning practitioner and expert, and it's been a delight to listen to the conversations. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, George, Henrik, and Gilly for excellent presentations. And thank you, Ellen, for your wonderful moderation. And thank you to the audience for all of your questions and participation. It's made this a very useful conference. And I think we've now decided that we'll run more of these going forward. It was a bit of a blow for us when we had to cancel our annual conference in Berlin this year. And we were looking at ways in which we could engage our members and others. And this has been a great start, I think, to doing that. So thank you very much indeed. In terms of follow-up, I've got all your email addresses, and I'll be sending you a link tomorrow or the day after to a copy of the recording that you can access and share with your colleagues. In addition to that, I'll be sharing the slides. I hope all the participants are happy that I should do that. Those slides will be available and with a link to the same email. And I'll be able to send you information about EADL as well. Those of you who are members, thank you very much for continuing to be members. It's a delight to work with you. And I look forward to seeing many others of you as members in the future. Thank you very much.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.